Hello, class. Today we are going to make a concept map using our notes over histology from last class. So grab a piece of paper. In my mind, I plan this to take an entire piece of paper. I have mine oriented landscape style. You can organize yours however you want. First off, these boxes over here you are not drawing today. I just snipped these from our notes that we took last class as a quick review and reference into the three different categories of tissues that we talked about and how they're broken down. So you do not need to draw these. You can reference your own notes from the other day in that chart that we took notes on. So first off, I'm going to start my concept map by just putting the word tissues in the middle. So we're talking about different tissues, the way that cells are organized to work together in our body. And again, we took a page of notes on epithelial tissue. We took a page of notes on connective tissue. And then that last page was excitable tissue. So I'm going to have those three categories branching off. Yours can look different. That's okay. All right. I'm just going to look at this epithelial section up here for now because we're going to talk about epithelial tissue. They're tissues that line the inside and outside of our bodies. And we had two categories, simple, which was one cell layer thick, and stratified, which was two or more cell layers thick. Looking at simple, we had four different kinds of simple epithelium. So simple squamous, one cell layer thick, scale-shaped, so very thin, flat, wide cells, good for diffusion. We have simple cuboidal, one cell layer thick, cube-shaped, right? So they're about as tall as they are wide. Simple columnar, one cell layer thick. They look like columns, so they're taller than they are wide. And then kind of that interesting one called pseudostratified, which we find in our respiratory system. It looks like it could be stratified or layered, but it's not. If you look carefully, it is still one cell layer thick. So those are simple epithelium. Let's look at stratified. Some similar words, right? We have stratified because it's multi-layered and squamous because it's flat or scale-shaped. And remember, stratified epithelial tissue get their name from what this top cell layer looks like. So stratified squamous, you might see lots of different layers, and the bottom might look maybe like cuboidal shaped, but the layers across the top are going to be squamous. So that's why we call it stratified squamous. We have stratified cuboidal. Again, you might have like two cell layers thick. The top layer looks cube-shaped. Stratified columnar. Again, we might have two cell layers thick, but the top one has a columnar shape. And then we have our interesting one here called transitional. Remember, that one's found in the bladder. It looks kind of wiggly on top because it's very able to stretch. So as our bladder fills up with fluid, our transitional epithelium stretches out so your bladder can hold a lot of liquid. All right, that's epithelial tissue. The next part, I'm just going to switch it out for connective over here to remind you of the categories we talked about last time. So let's add those in, branching off of connective. So we talked about fibrous connective tissue, adipose, cartilage, blood, and bone. So take a moment to draw those in. And let's start with fibrous. If we look back at our notes, we'll notice there's two categories of fibrous connective tissue. We have loose and we have dense. Loose connective tissue has a lot of like white space or open space in it. And dense, it's compact, right? But they both have a lot of different kinds of fibers. So our loose fibrous connective tissue, our first type is reticular. This is found, for instance, in our lymphatic system. You have a lot of reticular tissue in your lymph nodes because there's a lot of space for that lymphatic fluid to kind of fill up your lymph nodes and interact with the immune cells that are housed there. So your lymphatic fluid gets checked out by those immune cells before it returns to the bloodstream. We also have areolar tissue. I think of this as like the glue of our body. It has a lot of open space for materials to kind of come in and out, like blood vessels, nerves, right? We have some under our skin. It holds tissues in place, holds other kinds of tissues in place. All right, when we look at dense connective tissue, we have dense regular. Regular means it has a regular pattern to it, a repeating pattern, a nice wave-like pattern. And this doesn't have like open white spaces in your body. Tendons are going to be a great example of that. They're very strong. Then we have dense irregular, also very strong, but because it has an irregular sort of pattern to it, the fibers in it, they don't run all the same direction. This is going to be also very strong, but in a different way. It resists tears and abrasion. So this is why we have dense irregular connective tissue in parts of our skin, underneath our skin, and in the capsules that surround our organs. Next up, we have adipose, right? Fat storage. Lots of functions there in our body. And then if we look at cartilage, we talked about 3 different kinds. Right? Remember back to our notes. The first one was hyaline cartilage. Before you're born, your skeleton starts out in the form of hyaline cartilage, and then it ossifies over time into bone. You still have hyaline cartilage that remains in certain parts of your skeleton, like your costal cartilage in your ribs, and your articular cartilage that's on the end of bones. Articular is just talking about your joints. So you have hyaline cartilage lining your joints. It's very glassy and smooth and very pretty. We also have elastic cartilage in places like your outer ear, right? It's very bendy. It doesn't break. And we have fibrocartilage, which is very good at dealing with compressive forces, shock absorption. So you have it in your knees, right, your meniscus in your knee, and in between your vertebrae. We also talked about blood and bone, specifically compact bone. All right, if we look over at excitable tissues, I'm going to just refer to that section of our notes. Right, you took some notes on a couple different kinds. Let's draw those in. We have nervous and muscle. When we talked about nervous tissue, I'm sorry that this is blocked a little bit. When we talked about nervous tissue, we talked about neurons. They are the parenchymal cells of your nervous system. That just means they're the cells that do the main job. So you have neurons that are extremely good at sending and receiving signals very quickly. They have a lot of branches coming off of them, much more on them later. You also have a ton of different other cells that are considered to be supportive cells in your nervous system that we'll talk about later as well. Then if we look at muscle, we talked about 3 different kinds. We have skeletal muscle, which we'll probably focus on by far the most in this class. Skeletal muscle is striated. It has stripes. We'll talk about why. It is also voluntary, right? You can decide when you want to move your arm, your finger. We use it for talking, right? So skeletal system is made of, your skeletal muscle makes up what we call our muscular system in our body. Cardiac muscle. Cardiac means pertaining to the heart. This muscle is only found in the heart. And it's kind of interesting because it is striated like your skeletal muscle, but it is involuntary, right? We don't have to sit there and constantly tell our heart to pump, which is a really good thing. So cardiac muscle. And then the last one is smooth muscle. It is not striated. It is also involuntary, like your cardiac muscle. We find this in our organs, our blood vessels, in our skin. We find it all over the place. All right, guys, so that is our concept map over tissues. You do not have to draw this for the exam, but some people like to scribble it down on a piece of paper as they're working on their test, because you will get questions about which ones kind of fall in different categories. So for instance, I might give you a list of tissues, and you have to tell me which one is not a simple epithelial tissue, or which one is not stratified. Or I might give you a checkbox question where you have to identify which tissues are loose fibrous, or which ones are the 3 kinds of cartilage. So make sure you know which ones kind of fall in different categories and how they're organized because it will help you on the test. But you do not need to draw this, although if I give you scratch paper on the test, you are welcome to. All right, thank you guys. Those are the different kinds of tissues that we have in our body. Thanks.